Hi, Christy.
Hi, Jeff.
We're recording now.
The many hours of conversation you and I have had,
Yeah.
we've had probably half of them that haven't been recorded.
You know what we should do? We should start a podcast.
You think? Let's call it the why and the buy.
All right.
So welcome everyone to the Why and the Buy podcast. My name is Christie Walters and I'm joined by Jeff Bajorek. Good morning, Jeff.
Hey, Christy, how you doing?
I'm doing fabulous today. So we are going to talk about creativity today, and we've got an exciting guest coming on. You want to tell us a little bit about why you started with this topic? So I'll let you describe what your thoughts were when you came up with it.
Creativity. What's creativity? I had this idea for a podcast about creativity because it is, like most of the things that I like to talk about and most of the things I like to bring up, it's one of these underrated topics. It's one of these underrated performance factors, if you will. You can't really stand out without any creativity. If there were no creativity in the world, let alone the business world, we'd all look exactly the same. We would all be doing exactly the same things, and it'd be really, really boring. Not because what we'd be doing wouldn't necessarily be fun, but when it's the same thing over and over and over again, it gets mundane. So there's so much creativity around us everywhere we look. In the way, speaking of the way we look, you know, the way you get dressed in the morning. What do you put a little pocket square in your coat? You wear a different kind of shirt, or is it just gray suit, white shirt, black shoes every single day, right? And there's room to be creative, and I think that's what separates us, and I think that is what is most important about this topic. And it's underrated because you don't think about it, and most people don't feel that they're very creative despite everything that's going on around them. Yeah. And I think if it's something you can focus on and enhance, it can really help you get a leg up in your career.
Well, and I think it's also one of those areas where we are blocked more often. I've had this conversation with several people over the last couple of weeks and talked a lot about the creative blocks that we run up against in our daily lives. You know, so for you and I, we have to write, we have to share our perspectives on certain topics on a regular basis. And although I can sit here and have this conversation with you, when I sit down with pen to paper or fingertips to keyboard, it becomes a very big challenge. So this was an interesting topic for me because it's one of the areas in my business I feel I struggle with the most.
Well, and think about it too from a problem-solving standpoint. And not just the problem of being able to put finger to keyboard. That's a different problem. Think about it in your sales career. We've got an issue where we've got a product that we are hired to sell, and our clients have problems that we need to solve. And we have to come up with the way, not only that our product or service is the solution to the problem that they're trying to solve, but also in a way that everybody wins, right? Great, I can't just give away my product or my solution for free. That's great for the client. They really appreciate it. But ultimately, how am I doing any good for my company that way? By the same token, it could be the most expensive product in the world. It may work, but if the client doesn't have the budget to be able to put that together, then it's not a solution for them. So Not only do we have to come up with how the service is the solution for the problem, but then how does everybody benefit from that relationship?
Right.
And there are multiple problems on multiple levels there, and that's where you really have to get creative. And there are so many ways to approach it. And, you know, like I mentioned just a minute ago, so many people feel like they're not creative, that if you can be known as the creative person, then all of a sudden, you're the one that gets the phone call. Hey, Christy, I don't know how to solve this problem. I don't even know if this is what you do, but I know that you always seem to have some sort of a solution that I've not thought of. Why don't we get a cup of coffee? Why don't we talk? What's your hourly rate? What's your, whatever that is.
Right.
But being known as that person who just kind of finds solutions by thinking whether it's outside of the box or inside of the box, it doesn't really matter. Being known as someone who's creative enough to always have a solution, that is invaluable. Mm-hmm. When we think of creativity, you think Salvador Dali, you think Pablo Picasso, you think, a musician or an artist who's kind of breaking genres. Radiohead comes to mind. They kind of just revolutionized the whole genre that they've been formerly associated with. That is very, very creative. But that is also something that's very, very difficult to associate with, because that's otherworldly talent that most people just don't possess.
Right.
Well, what about from a problem-solving standpoint? I always have good solutions for complicated problems. Oh, well, that's creativity. We just don't like to call it that.
Yeah, right.
So let's think about it in those terms. And all of a sudden, not only are you a hell of a lot more creative than you thought you were, but also creativity is way more important than you ever thought it was, because you understand the necessity of problem solving.
Right.
So that's why I really like this topic.
Yeah. Well, and it's also, if you think about the flood of information about good storytelling that exists out in the publishing sphere, right? Whether it's in podcast form or book form or audiobook form, even in TED Talks, for example, that concept of structuring a good story has at its core a level of creativity to it. And it's also a level of understanding your audience. So creativity isn't just about painting the pretty picture from scratch or from memory or whatever the situation may be. It's about understanding who's going to consume that idea, who is going to connect with that idea, and being able to speak in their language, not yours. Now, artists do it in a completely different form, right? That they just express themselves in ways that you either like it or you don't, and so be it, right?
And they don't care what language you're speaking.
That's right.
It's about the project for them. Yeah.
No, in business, we have to be a little bit more succinct in how we communicate with the broader world. But there is an element of that. Don't judge the idea before the idea has really come to fruition, right? So don't judge too quickly in the ideas. And we've got an interesting guest coming on today's podcast. You want to tell us a little bit about Don?
Don, the idea guy?
Don, the idea guy.
I met Don through social media, actually. We had found ourselves in some similar groups. Like you and I, Don has had an affiliation with Jeffrey Gitomer's organization. And so we kind of found ourselves swimming in similar pools, so to speak. And we just kind of met and got talking a little bit. And he only lives a couple hours away, but we've never actually met in person. But we met each other through different social media channels. We've been on some blabs together when Blab was still a thing, a year or so ago. He's just really struck me as someone who is appropriately named as the idea guy. I told him this. I said, look, you're easily the most creative person I know. And I know some artists. I know some Dali types. I know some Radiohead types, right? And that's fine. But I think it's appropriate because he's the most creative person I've ever really spoken to in terms of his ability to get right into that mode.
Yeah.
His creativity muscles are very, very well developed. He clearly does it a lot, and he does it as a service to his clients. And it's helped him. It's helped him through his career, but it's also helped me to realize how creative I actually have been when I haven't thought about it.
Right.
There's a ton of lessons. This was a great interview, and I'm really looking forward to getting on with it.
Absolutely. Well, I tell you what, why don't we just jump right in? I'd love to look for our audience to hear our conversation with Don. And then we're going to wrap up towards the end of this as well and talk a little bit about some of our key takeaways from the discussion with Don. Don, it's really nice to meet you. I'm Christy. We haven't had a chance to talk before, but I've seen your pictures all over Jeffrey's site and a couple of other places. And Jeff speaks very highly of you. So I'm excited that we get a chance to have this conversation.
Well, thank you, Christy. I'm glad I get to be a guest.
Yeah.
Let's talk creativity. Don, how did you get involved in the creative business? Like, how did you decide that you could make a living on being the idea guy?
Well, I actually started becoming the idea guy, trading ideas and approaching it from a sales creativity point when the printing company that I did graphic design work for decided that I had the potential to be a better salesperson than I was a graphic designer, and told me that they needed me in the field selling. And I immediately decided that, as most people think with salespeople, I don't want to be that guy. I don't want to be the sales guy. I grew up with the quintessential salesperson of the time being Herb Tarlick from WKRP in Cincinnati. And nobody wants to be that guy. So as I started applying other places for graphic design jobs, and while I was looking for that, so I could leave that printing company to go actually keep doing design work, I had to do sales. And part of sales was cold calling. And I definitely did not want to call people up and say, do you want to buy some brochures? Do you want to buy some business cards? And hey, do you need a letterhead and printed this week? That wasn't me. And the company owner sent me to a sales seminar that was being put on by Xerox company. And they had a speaker there I'd never heard of, who wrote a book I never read. And it's o'clock in the morning at a Holiday Inn, drinking terrible coffee and listening to a loud, obnoxious salespeople talk in the hall before the event started. And there was one especially loud, obnoxious guy that was like, "This is my people now. These are the people I have to be with." And we go into the seminar, and the guy from Xerox gets up on stage, who was the second loudest, obnoxious guy in the hall, and introduced the first obnoxious guy in the hall as the speaker. And that was my first meeting with Jeffrey Gitomer.
Wow. Wow.
Wow.
And I went,
that's pretty impressive.
I went, oh my God, okay, all right. And the first line out of his mouth was, "None of you guys look like you're having fun. Sales is a game and you guys aren't having enough fun." And I went, fun? You can have fun doing this? And for the next 3 hours, I'm completely transfixed with this message coming from the front of the room about how you can actually have fun with sales. And I'm like, okay, I'm going to go see if this is true or not. And that's what I did from there. I did not call people up and ask them if they wanted to buy business cards. I found out things about them pre-LinkedIn. Jeffrey was pitching the American City business journals back then. So I'm reading the business journals, finding out things about companies in town, and started calling them with an idea that just happened to connect to printing. So if I read about a company that was starting a recycling program, I would call them up and say, I'm going to give them ideas on how to reprint their stuff on recycled paper. Or if I knew that there was a coffee shop opening, I could call them up and talk to them about these cool coffee mugs that we would sell with their logo on them. Or if there was an event coming to town, I could call them up and pitch them t-shirts for the event. I started applying uses for the products we had, rather than just saying, we have these products for sale, do you have some use for them? I would come up with the use. I'd come up with the campaign, and I had a lot more fun with that. I quickly found that by sharing the ideas with them, the products sold themselves. I didn't have to sell the products, and frequently I didn't have to bid on the products because the project was my idea.
Right.
So one of my big customers was a health and pharmaceuticals company, and I just started talking to them about different ways they could do things in-house, and I started getting conversations with different people in different departments, and they would call me in to work on projects. I had one person call me in to say they were getting ready to do a training session, and they needed manuals, but they didn't want one of those great big 3-ring binders that after the training it went up on the shelf. They needed something that the people would keep on their desks. And I came up with this idea for a flip book, kind of like a table tent that you'd see in a restaurant, like you'd see the desserts in O'Charlie's, right? But they were the training session tips. And when you were done, it folded flat and stuck in a plastic pouch on the side of their monitors. And she said, I knew if I called my idea guy, you'd be able to help me. And that's where I got named the idea guy. And I never let up from then on. It was idea guy from then on out.
That's so cool. I mean, you're talking about essentially what we call today content marketing before it was even a buzzword. And what's interesting is you used your creativity and your ideas for these projects to where, and you said it, you're like, they're not going anywhere else to bid my product. The product carries out the vision, but the vision was mine. How are they going to say, oh, great idea, Don, we're going to go to your competitor and pay a penny less per coffee mug for that? I mean, so you
it's not like that doesn't happen.
No, sure. But the thing is, you've given them every reason not to do that, right? Yep. And if you're a human being, right, how are you going to take Don's great idea and take it to Jimmy down the street to have him actually print the T-shirts? It's ridiculous.
It was a differentiator in winning so many products. And what I found was the creativity that I was channeling towards design and taking people's concepts about what they wanted for printing pieces. I was taking the creativity that I was using to design that piece and just channeling it to the planning stage, the concept stage instead. But it was so easy for me, I thought it was easy because it appealed to my ability, my strengths for coming up with ideas. So if somebody came, even if I was bidding against somebody else, I would change the specs of the projects, not strategically, but just because I can't help myself and say, hey, you know what you could do? You could try this instead. An example is, a lot of my examples are printing because that's when I first started into sales, and that's where I found the difference. I apply it everywhere now, but back then it cost a lot of money to print a 4-color brochure.
Right.
And I had a client that wanted me to bid on a 4-color brochure, and I said, you know what, we could do this with something called a duotone print at that point, where it was black plus 1 color, and because the photo they were using was basically the sky, they sold airplanes. Because it was the sky, you really only saw blue, white, and black anyway. Right. So I took a 4-color job, quoted it as a 2-color job, and I won the bid because I went to work for an apparel company, a T-shirt company, and we were bidding for doing T-shirts for a national show that was coming through. It was a chocolate festival, and they were having everybody in town print on doing T-shirts for the event. I said, wouldn't it be cool if the shirt smelled like chocolate? And they go, yeah, that'd be really cool. How can we do that? I go, well, we have to mix the ink to print on the shirts. Can't we take like the scent stuff that they use to make candles scented and put that into the ink? And nobody tried that before. And we tried it and it worked. And we sold chocolate scented shirts. And that was a huge project to win, just based on a different way of doing things.
That's amazing.
Yep. Well, and it's also an amazing perspective on what the customer would want without them telling you what they want, right? So the customer wasn't sitting there thinking, I would really love for my shirts to smell like chocolate. But man, the wow, when you walk in the door with a chocolate scented T-shirt had a huge impact. None of your competitors could hold a candle.
And even if they did, it was going to be an ad. I'm like, oh, well, we could do that too. Well, if you could do that, why didn't you?
Right.
That's awesome. So, Don, you have a podcast as well called Running Through My Mind. Congratulations on that, by the way. Jeff and I know how hard it is to get started at one of these. So I think it's fabulous to talk to a fellow podcaster. And I love the fact that you do yours in the parking lot before you go into the office every day.
Yeah. So here's a challenge that most creative people will be able to relate to, and that is executing the project, right? You come up with all these ideas and then you got to get it done. So I'd been wanting to do a podcast for a while and was trying to find a co-host. I work better when I'm bouncing ideas off of people.
Sure.
And the people who said they wanted to do it just always postpone. I'm like, you know what? I'm literally on the way to work. I'm like, what is my minimum viable product on this, right? What can I do? Like, well, I got my phone. I'm going to use the Spreaker app. When I get to the office, I'm going to turn on the recorder and I'm just going to record. And that was episode 1. And I did that. And I appreciate you congratulating me on the podcast. You may still be catching up on back episodes. I ended the podcast on episode 50.
Oh, you did? I didn't know that.
I just did it like a couple weeks ago because it was an experiment to see if I could do it. I did it every day, Monday through Friday, didn't miss a day for 50 episodes. And it did what I needed it to do. I got contacted by the two people who had originally said they wanted to co-host a podcast with me. And so I thought we were going to do this together. I'm like, yeah, so did I. So now I'm probably going to launch 3 podcasts. I'll have the 2 that I'm going to have the co-host with, and then I'm going to go back to doing a solo podcast, but it'll be weekly rather than daily. But it served its purpose in that it was, one, proof of concept to say it negates anybody's excuse ever who says, I can never start a podcast. I don't have time for the equipment. That excuse is dead, and I can prove you 50 episodes worth that excuse doesn't hold water.
Right.
I got a sponsor for the show 4 episodes in. It was a coffee sponsor, a company called Drip Joy. They sent me a case of coffee, and I mentioned them in every episode. And I got 2 or 3 paying clients from those 50 episodes. So when somebody says podcasting is a waste of time, I can say, nope. I got new followers, I got new business, I got new corporate relationships with the sponsor, and I proved proof of concept. So you just have to do it. Whatever small step it is, you have to take action on it. So
I think Jeff and I have experienced that quite a bit in our businesses too. It's really hard when you do what we do, right? Where it's coaching, or in your case, brainstorming, for people to get a sense of how you think. Mm-hmm. And if you're doing something in the creative space, media space like this, it allows people to see your thought process, how you interact, what your personality is like. It takes a lot of the fear and concern away from the client that's looking to hire you on.
Well, and you think about it too, write a blog post every day. Fine. Go do some speaking engagements and do some public speaking and some public presentations. That's fine. But when you write, you're polished. When you speak, you're rehearsed. When you do a podcast, I know I'm not alone, but I know this doesn't include everybody either. I like listening to 2 engaging people talk. I don't care what it is they're talking about. But I've also told a lot of people too that, listen, if someone is literally the best in the world at whatever it is they do, I don't care if it's basket weaving. I'm captivated for at least a couple of minutes, right? I want to see someone who's really good at what they do what they do, and just be in their own state. So I think when you get an opportunity to just have a conversation with somebody, you press record, and then you put it out there for people to find. It's amazing what happens. And, you take the next step with marketing to then direct people to those conversations, those podcasts, those videos, those, workshops, whatever. That's one thing. But to be able to demonstrate your expertise in a natural way, to be able to really put your most authentic presentation of yourself forward. I think authenticity is really one of the biggest driving factors, or one of the biggest factors of why people will do business with another company. It deals directly with the experience that you get and the feeling that you feel when you do business with somebody. And you make that connection through, I think, a podcast or some other sort of recorded conversation, whatever you want to call it, more so than any other way that's available right now. And Don, like you said, press record on your phone in the car or on the microphone in the office, and you can get a good microphone for $30 or $40 right now. There is really no barrier to entry to this thing.
It's interesting. You'll hear a lot of the podcasters' advice is get a room that you can have kind of padding on the walls, right?
Sure.
And a lot of the podcasters are actually recording their podcasts in their closet. They'll take their mic and go in the closet because the clothes hanging up there create this natural barrier to keep the audio sounding rich.
Right.
And what I found was recording in the closed confines of an automobile had that exact same effect. Now, there was one episode where I happened to be recording the morning that they decided to do the landscape work, and there's a guy with a pizza out there. But it actually wasn't that bad as far as the audio leaking in. I could hear it. It sounded a lot worse to me than it did on that episode.
Right.
But as you said before you hit record during our conversation, you can't get obsessed about the quality audio. If there's a little whine going on in the background of this audio, you know what? That's authenticity. It's real, and you did it. You didn't let us.
Yeah.
If you wait until everything was perfect, you'd never get anything done.
Yes.
Yeah. So actually, one of the questions that I wrote down, and Jeff knows because we've been down this road a couple of times as well, is one of my biggest challenges is that getting ready trap, right? So spending a lot of time working through perfecting whatever it is you're going to launch. And Jeff and I, very early on, in fact, I think before we ever even started the podcast, he had he made a statement to me. He's like, sometimes you just have to hit send. And it's interesting because I can advise a client to do exactly that. I can cut through the noise and advise a client to do that. But when it comes to my own business, that getting ready trap is it plagues me. And it sounds like you experience that quite a bit too with
Well, first of all, there's a line I use that I'm sure I stole from somebody else, but I've said it enough times I can claim it as my own. And that is, we are all our own worst customers.
Mm-hmm.
We are our worst customers. I can advise, if somebody explained that they were having a problem that mirrored every problem in my life, I have the perfect solution for them. If they just take these 3 steps, they will absolutely begin to experience a better reality, right? But man, I don't have time to listen to my own advice. It's hard to read their own stuff through that lens, but it's really easy when somebody else is talking about it. So yeah, we are absolutely our own worst clients.
Yeah.
The other is, Jeff, you said Jeff uses the line, just hit send. Sometimes you have to hit send. I use virtually that same line. I say publish. You have to hit publish. And the exact same spirit behind it. And it's, you are never going to be ready. One, you're never going to be ready. Things are never going to be perfect. You're never going to get all the typos. I love it when somebody sends me an email and says they found a typo in something I wrote.
Yeah.
That means they read it.
Exactly. One, I know you read it. Two, you just had a point of contact with me that we didn't have before because you wrote me and said you found something. Now I have a chance to thank you. I have a chance to interact with you. I have a chance to fix the thing on my website. And usually I'll be like, congratulations, you won. And I'll send them an ebook or something. Well,
right.
I hate that in there for somebody to find. Now, some of the articles I publish might have 2 or 3 hidden prizes inside because that's how good I roll with typos. But I'm not going to let the fear of somebody finding a typo stop me from hitting publish.
Right. Yeah. So one of the other things, I want to switch gears a little bit on you. One of the other things that I heard, I can't remember if I read this on your website or if I heard it in your podcast, but you talked a lot about the differences between idea creation and idea evaluation. And you have a very interesting process that you go through when you come up with new ideas or you work with a client. Can you elaborate a little bit on that?
Sure. I mean, so that's a basic principle of brainstorming. And if you've participated in any group brainstorming session at a corporate level, first of all, you have my condolences because they're the worst experiences ever. I've almost stopped brainstorming in groups because it's so frustrating. Because the person at the beginning of the event tells you, let's lay down the ground rules. There's no bad ideas. Oh, first of all, that's a lie. Let's start with a lie. There are all sorts of horrible ideas out there. There are terrible, terrible ideas. We're going to hear about a lot of them in this room and people start shouting them out. The difference is we're not going to label them as bad ideas right now. They're just ideas. And you collect all the ideas. It doesn't matter if it could be the worst idea you ever heard. You know what? Let's start out with the worst ideas. What's the worst possible way we can solve this problem? And get that going because a lot of people have the worst ways. Well, I'll tell you what we shouldn't do. We shouldn't do this or we shouldn't hire that company.
Right.
We shouldn't put Jeff in charge of it, that kind of a thing. Not you, Jeff.
Oh, right. It looks good on you, though.
Jeff, that hypothetical Jeff.
But you collect all the ideas. That's the idea generation, the idea creation stage. Evaluation comes later, and I would argue that it comes a day later because you're going to find, I guarantee you're going to find that 1 or 2 of those worst ideas, the worst solution possible, is going to be the seed from which the ideal solution grows. Because somebody's going to say, okay, well, not Jeff Jones, but we should totally get Jeff Bajorek in on this. You said Jeff, and it reminded me of this other Jeff, right? Or you said we shouldn't get this piece of software, and that made me think of the other pieces of software that are like that, and I found 3 other ones, and this one looks like it's pretty cool. You are going to find the kernel of the best ideas sometimes in the worst ideas. The evaluation has to be separated from the generation or your brain's trying to do two different things at one time. You are simultaneously coming up with a concept, weighing and judging its value. And most people are doing that when it happens in a public forum, like a corporate brainstorming. They're doing that before the idea even comes out of their mouth.
Right.
So you're not getting the benefit of that input, which frequently sparks another idea in somebody else's head, no matter how bad you may think it is.
Right.
So that's why you have to separate the two.
You get all these ideas, you get bad ideas, you get good ideas. You don't call them bad or good because you evaluate them the next day. Don, I've asked you this before. How do you record this stuff? Because you can see my desk right now. I've got a bunch of pieces of paper that all look the same and today I'm writing in red and yesterday I wrote in blue, and I've got all this stuff, and then I don't know how to organize it, how to keep it. I've gotten as far as starting to record stuff. Okay, I'm getting there. That's fine. It's not enough just to think about it. You got to put it somewhere. Good. How do you organize it all?
So everybody has their own method, and I wouldn't presume to have the best method. What I would say is the important part is to record them by whatever means necessary, whether you're recording audio or you're writing it down in a physical notebook. Like I love my Moleskine notebooks, but I also love Evernote, and I also love Google Docs. And I find that if I record something, it's tough for me to get back to a timestamp, especially if it's a long recording. Mm-hmm. Like if I'm going to record a brainstorm session with a client, I put the onus of recording ideas on my client when I'm doing it for a client. Because if I'm going to be caught up on writing down the ideas, I can't generate them fast enough.
Right.
I can't write fast enough to keep up with idea generation. So I always say they shouldn't write it either. They should record it, and then they can. Transcription services are like a dime a minute now. You can find them for.
Yeah.
So record them, send them to somebody else to transcribe. If you want to do a cheap hack for it, upload it to YouTube as a video file. YouTube does kind of a poor job, but it's an automatic free transcription service for all the videos that are uploaded. There's a little transcription tab, and if you click on it, it's a sometimes very bad. You ever watch those bad lip reading videos on YouTube?
Oh, all the time. I love those videos.
So it's like a bad lip reading version of your transcription, but it gives you a place to start, and you can correct the things that you saw there. But then there are the other free services. With podcasting growing so much in popularity, a ton of those services have emerged, and a lot of them, it's very competitive now.
Yeah.
So record them by whatever means necessary, but by all means record them. The thing I like about digital versions, like an Evernote, is that you can use tags. I'm a big fan of tags. So those are like the keywords that you can attach to a document. Evernote does a really good job of allowing you to add tags and search by tags. So if I do digital pieces, I like to have the tags. But I start a separate document if I'm going to brainstorm on a certain topic. I've got a different page in the journal if it's going to be a new idea. And it's fun. I like going back through old journals and going, oh, that's an idea. It was an idea that I wasn't sure was good or bad. It was an idea that I may not have been ready to act on at that point. But wow, I'm glad I ran across this now because the situation has changed or a new piece of technology has come out. And now that idea that I thought was unrealistic at the time is now super easy to execute because of this other thing that happened.
As the idea guy, as a master of creativity, you're MC, Don, the idea guy now. You've just been christened. I would assume that it's just something so ingrained in your daily routine that you don't even think about doing this. But for someone who understands the value of creativity, doesn't necessarily feel or wouldn't necessarily describe themselves as being creative, what do you recommend as far as guidelines or suggestions for setting aside time dedicated to being still, being quiet, and being creative?
I think what gets scheduled gets done. I love my Google Calendar, so anything that I need, I add to that calendar. So it's even to the point of content creation. I've got a separate. The nice thing about Google Calendars is it lets you create multiple calendars that you can color code. So I can create a content calendar and say, I'm gonna think about this concept on this day, or I'm gonna generate ideas for this client on this day. When you're in sales, as most of your audience is, I would set aside time and rotate through my customer list and brainstorm on ideas for that customer. I did this when I worked in media sales. I was a digital sales manager for a radio broadcasting company. And we would get together once a week with the sales team, and the sales team would come in with a client they wanted to brainstorm on, and we would just brainstorm ideas on that client. It could be a client that was actively on the air. It could be a client that they hadn't heard from in 6 months. It could be a prospect that they just wanted to go in and talk to and kind of pitch them something. One, I love that process. It was great because we're coming up with new ideas for this client. And oh, by the way, while we're talking about that client, oh, I've got this client that's very similar to them, and I can apply that idea over here. So even though we might have been talking about one client, we came up with ideas that could be applied to many clients.
Right.
The flip side of that was when we would go to the client and say, we got together and we were brainstorming on ideas for you. What even I didn't immediately realize was that the client loved that. They were so flattered. The response was usually, you did what? You guys got together and talked about my business? Because it wasn't from, we got together and we need to come in here and pitch you this. It was, we got together and came up with some ideas that we think could grow your business. And some of them we would love to be able to help you with, but we had no problem giving them ideas that they used in a print ad or a TV campaign. The idea for the concept and the marketing concept still came from us, and we got that credit for bringing that concept to them, even though we had nothing to gain by it. Although we had everything to gain in terms of setting ourselves up as a resource, solidifying a personal relationship of being a person of value. If salespeople only call customers when they have something to pitch them, or there's a check that's due,
right?
Salespeople wonder why nobody takes their calls. That's why nobody takes your calls, because you never call with something that is generous, that in the long run will benefit you, perhaps even in the short run. But you have to call them up and give them something that's about them, that's not about you.
Right. Speaking from a true disciple of Jeffrey Gitomer, right? So that giving value first is huge.
Yeah.
And
you can't give enough.
Yeah.
The more you give, the more you get. But I don't understand the reluctance. I guess when I first started as idea guy, right? And I think a lot of people who have ideas, they write them down and then they don't tell anybody about them. Because somebody might steal the idea. Okay, first of all, and again, another quote I'll steal from somebody else. If your idea is any good, you're going to have to shove it down people's throats. That's just the way it works. Now, if you give away the ideas, more people will come to you for ideas because they know that you have them. And that was, again, I'm my own worst client. A friend of mine had to point out, you're trying to sell ideas, right? I go, yeah. He goes, you need to give more ideas away. I'm like, well, that sounds completely counterintuitive.
Right.
He goes, try it. He goes, you come up with way too many ideas to act on. Take just the ones you're never going to do anything with and just share those.
Right.
And that was easy. I had plenty of those ideas. And once I started doing that, I became more and more known as a resource for ideas. So if they need hey, I saw you had an idea for this, could you come up with an idea for that? And it was a natural connection.
Right. So, I think we'll have our audience is going to be very mixed on this podcast, but I do believe we'll have a fair number of speakers and writers and bloggers that will be listening in. Any advice on creativity techniques for those who may be suffering from writer's block?
You're dealing with, all right, so I know Jeff and I have a history with Gitomer. Do you as well?
I do.
All right. So there's no such thing as writer's block, right? Because there's no such thing as speaker's block.
Right.
So talk it out loud rather than when you're talking with a friend.
Yeah.
That's the other thing. I connect creativity to coffee a lot. So the best way to enjoy a cup of coffee is to share it with friends. So I don't know if you're drinking coffee on your side or not. I'm drinking coffee on my side. We're having a cup of coffee and we're bouncing around ideas. So if you're stuck with ideas, go have a cup of coffee with somebody. So you share a cup of coffee and you share some ideas. That's the best way to do it.
Right.
I also say once you get rolling, new topic whenever you have a new cup of coffee. So every time you need a refill, change topic, talk about something else. We get into the whole generate ideas now and evaluate later. That's picking out the beans versus the filtering process. Because if you only picked out the perfect beans to brew your cup of coffee, you'd have a really hard time filling up even a K-cup, because those beans are all odd shaped and different colors, and some of them have different marks on them. You'd have a hard time picking out the perfect coffee bean. But if you just take all the beans, all the ideas, and you mush them together and you ground them all up. Then when you filter them out, you get a really good cup of coffee, which means you get a really good idea.
Right.
Ideas are best when they're acted upon as quickly as possible, just like coffee is best when it's served hot. I'm not talking to all you weird iced coffee drinkers. I think that ideas need to be highly caffeinated. You take the ones that are higher risk, the stronger concepts, not the weak ones. When you're coming up with a list of ideas, I say you throw away the first 10 or 20. The first 10 ideas that you came up with, everybody else came up with. The next 10, some small percentage, the top 10% of people came up with the next 10. But when you start on idea 21, nobody came up with that one. So you throw away the first 10. It's a low-hanging fruit. Also, I think when people try and come up with ideas, they sit down and they go, okay, now I'm going to come up with ideas.
I was going to ask you about that too, because you said that you just kind of schedule time for yourself to be creative. I don't know if that's something that a lot of people feel is very easy for them.
Yeah, but scheduling time to be creative is not the creative act. It's scheduling the time to do something creative. It might be to read. It might be to watch an interesting movie or documentary. It might be to listen to music. It might be to go to a concert. It might be to get together with a friend over a coffee and just catch up. It might be to research on an industry. It might be to do research on a client. That's creativity. The ideas come up all over the place. That's why you have to write them down when you get them, or you'll forget them. But the more you become in the habit of it, I don't sit down. I do sit down. I do sit down and go, okay, I need ideas for, but I'm very specific about, I need ideas for podcast topics. And I can come up with 10 ideas easy for podcast topics, just like you could do for blog articles and that kind of thing. Then you see where you can take those 10 ideas. Now that I have that idea, what can I do with the idea? Do you guys know Scott Ginsburg, the name tag guy?
No.
I don't think so.
You got to have him on the podcast.
Okay.
This is a guy who's made his fame by wearing a name tag that says, hello, my name is Scott, 24/7 for like the last 10 years. He's in Ripley's Believe It or Not. He's been in the Wall Street Journal. So he's an expert on approachability. But one of the things that I got from Scott was, now that we have this, what does that make possible? So now that we have a podcast, what does that make possible? Now that I've got a list of 10 ideas on clients I want to approach, now that I have that list, what else does that make possible? Does that mean that you know more people in that category? Does that mean it's an opportunity to have a webinar? Does that mean it's an opportunity to put together a sponsored happy hour and bring them out? Is it an opportunity to introduce them to each other because they may not know each other? So every time you come up with an idea, go, now that I have that concept, what else can I get from that idea? And it might branch to another concept totally, or it might help you build out that idea and how to act on it.
Wow. I like that.
I like it.
I like that a lot.
Yeah.
The wrong way to do it, though, Jeff, is to sit down and go, I'm going to come up with ideas, and I'm going to sit in this chair until I come up with these ideas. If you're sitting in the chair, and Doug Hall, another creativity hero of mine, Doug Hall calls it brain drain. It's like you're taking your brain out of your head and you're wringing it like a washcloth.
Right.
And your brain is totally drained. You're not helping yourself. There's a writer, and I don't remember who the writer is, but it may have been Stephen King-ish. But he said, when you're sitting down to write and you're done, you're ready to stop. Stop while you still have something else to say. Not when you've written all you can write and you can't write no more. Like, stop when you still have something to say, because while you get up and walk away, you're like, oh yeah, and then I can do this, and then I can do. You can jot down the concepts so you don't forget, but don't sit there and keep writing until the blood dries on the keyboard. Like,
Right.
because that way when you sit down, one, you can't wait to get back to the keyboard.
Right.
Two, you know exactly where you're going to pick up. And three, it was pleasurable. It wasn't painful, because if you're going to do brain drain, it hurts. To use my coffee analogy, it's like putting an empty coffee pot back in the burner.
Oh, yeah.
It smells, it's hot, it's got that acrid, burnt on stuff that you can't clean. And nobody likes that.
Right.
You brew it, start brewing another pot. You always leave some left in the container. You don't drain yourself dry. And that goes with ideas and creativity too.
So Stephen King-ish, he wrote Cujo-ish, right?
Yeah.
Smart guy.
Trying to think of a better I can't. That was a really good one. You got me on that one. Stephen King-ish, right? Cujo-ish.
No, but I think that's something. I mean, even for a lot of people, and I find myself doing this to myself more often than I should. All right, it's time. I've got to sit down and write. And sometimes it's helpful to have a deadline because you can only prepare so far in advance. But at the same time, to corner yourself or paint yourself in that corner to where you say, okay, look, this is what I'm going to do. It's on the calendar. And if it's on the calendar, we have to do it. So, all right. But then you just sit there and then you get frustrated. And frustration is kind of counterintuitive to the process. Not counterintuitive, but counterproductive, certainly, to the process. But one of the things that you said without saying, though, if I was paying attention correctly, is that creativity is very much correlated with self-awareness and being aware when that creativity is flowing and being aware enough of that creativity to record it in some way, shape, or form, in the first place. Right? I mean, we've all had those conversations sitting around the campfire or whatever, kind of solving the world's problems with our friends in college or from college or whatever. But what do you do with that? And are you aware enough of that moment and those concepts to actually say, I should probably write this down somewhere?
That's true. But usually somebody in the conversation says it, right? They go, oh, that's good. And when that happens, you know that that's one that you should really write down, whether it's on the back of a napkin or you text it to your friend or record it into your iPhone. I think the other piece, when you said self-aware, I think we all have different clocks when we are at our best, when we're at our most productive. I know a lot of people are enthusiastic about mornings. I get up at 4:00 in the morning and I write for an hour, blah, blah. I'm like, I can't do that. I've tried to be a morning person. And it's not that I can't train myself to get up that early.
Right.
You don't want to be around me that early.
Right. You don't want to read what I write that early, I can assure you.
No, I mean, I've got a coffee mug that basically says, go away until this is empty, and then just come back and fill it up and go away again. But I'm way more productive in the evening. So about 7 or 8, I get into a mode where I can bounce around ideas a lot more easily. And I think it's because I've had more input during the day. So more things have happened to me that day. I've interacted with more people. I've seen more news articles. I've talked to different faces. I've read different things. And those naturally got me thinking in a direction, and that gave me more things to build ideas from. Because you can't, just like you can't put an empty pot back on the burner, you also can't brew a pot of coffee without any of the beans. You got to collect the beans.
Right.
It's a matter of collecting stuff, and then you build things from the stuff. That's why when we talked about brainstorming with clients, brainstorming for clients, when somebody would bring up one particular client to brainstorm on, it was way more easy to come up with the ideas for the next client because you would apply some of the same concepts. Well, if we did that for that client, couldn't we take that same principle, tweak it a little bit, and do something over here? There's no new ideas. I firmly believe there are no new ideas, but there are a lot of new combinations of old ideas. That's like with Legos. I'm going to use so many analogies and metaphors that it's going to confuse everybody. But like Legos, it's the same box of bricks. Everybody gets the same box of bricks. You can build anything out of those bricks. So it's just the bricks. We put them together in different ways.
Right. No, that's so cool. That's so cool. So, Don, this is a question that we ask everybody that we have on. Why do you do what you do?
I saw that, and it was nice to have a heads up about it. I still have an answer for you. The why for me always comes down to, and it's an opportunity to be creative on somebody else's behalf. Like I can be creative for me all the time. What I like doing is hearing about a challenge that a friend or a customer or a prospect has, and being able to channel ideas to help them solve that problem. I love being introduced to somebody as Don the Idea Guy and seeing the eye roll, seeing the what, who, the what. I love that because I just go, I know, just give it a minute. And we'll start talking and learn about the business. We go, well, have you tried this? Did you know about this? And they go, oh, that's a great idea. okay, so I keep score. If I hear somebody go, that's a great idea, I get a point. I like mark a little point down in my head. If they go, oh, that's why they call you the idea guy. It's like out of the park.
Grand slam. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm like, done like that. And I go, and that's why they introduced me as Don the Idea Guy. When I got my job in radio and the sales director was interviewing me, he totally understood like the branding of Don the Idea Guy. He found me because I was writing articles. We go through the interview process, and then he sets up a meeting with the general manager. And the general manager stays locked in a corner office and doesn't get out much into the real world. And came out and met, and I thought it went okay. And I heard back from the sales director about a week later, and he said, we're agreed, got the approval from the general manager, your meeting went fine. He said, I can go ahead and hire you if I want to, but if he ever has to introduce you as Don the Idea Guy, we're both fired. And I went, I get it, ha, ha, ha. Before, I was there 7 years. Before I left, it said Don the Idea Guy on my business cards, and he introduced me as Don the Idea Guy.
Nice.
So if you're going to call yourself something like that, you better have some ideas.
Yes.
You better live up to it. And
it's a built-in accountability partner, right?
Yeah. So that's my why too, is why? Because I call myself Don the Idea Guy. So I need to be creative every day, or I'm going to have to stop calling myself Don the Idea Guy. It really is just a way for me to serve, Jeff. I mean, it was a way that I found to channel creativity. No matter what job I had, no matter what title it might have been, in my head, it's always Don the Idea Guy. So I bring that creativity to whatever it is I'm working on. And that's fun. It's fun for me. Hopefully it's of value to the customers I'm trying to serve.
Wow, Christie, that was such a great interview. I love talking to Don. He's just full of inspiration, and I just know that we're going to hear more from him because we're going to have him as a guest, I'm sure, down the line as well.
Oh, I hope so.
So what do we have going next week?
Oh, next week you're going to love. I have a fabulous friend of mine, Chi-Chi Okeezy, and that is her real name. Chi-Chi has the most amazing energy. She's one of the best networkers in the city of Atlanta. She and I both went to the same school and just recently came across each other at a golfing event, and I'm extremely excited to talk about simple networking with Chi-Chi. So it's going to be a great topic. I think you guys are really going to love her energy.
Well, I'm really excited to talk about golf again.
Well, of course. We're always excited to talk about golf, right?
Well, that's going to be fantastic. So I hope you all enjoyed this episode with Don, and I hope you're all going to join us next week when we talk to Chi-Chi. Networking is something that you need to be better at, I promise.
Okay, great. And remember, Jeff, when you know your why, your hows and your whats get a lot better.
Thanks for throwing that out there, Christie. I appreciate it.
Anytime.
If you want to hear more from Don the Idea Guy, check out one of my favorite projects of his. It's called BigYellowSticky.com, and every day Don writes an inspirational message or a drawing or cartoon on a 3x3 yellow sticky note. Pretty much exactly what the name would imply, right? And for more of his projects, you can check him out at DonTheIdeaGuy.com. Thank you for joining us on this episode of the Why and the Buy podcast. If you liked us, subscribe. We can be found on iTunes, Stitcher Radio, SoundCloud, and really anywhere else you can get a podcast. And if you really liked us, then give us a 5-star review. We like those, and we like you too. Here at the Why and the Buy podcast, we've got our own house band. Christie and I think they're absolutely perfect for what we're trying to do with this podcast, and we hope you think so too. If you like them as much as we do, then you should check them out. They're called Haskins, and they're based in southeastern Michigan. You can find their music and more at haskinsmusic.com. Go check them out.